The Edge of 17 is directed by Kelly Fremon Craig and stars Hailee Steinfeld as Nadine, a very angsty teenager who's gone through a personal tragedy who thinks that life is awful. Everything sucks, she hates everybody around her, her best friend starts dating her older brother, so that actually does suck. That would suck. But for the most part, she hates everything about life. She has a hard time relating to other students, and she often finds herself sitting down with her teacher, played by Woody Harrelson, just vomiting out all of her problems to him while he sits there thinking, my God, I don't get paid enough for this. The last movie Kelly Fremon Craig made was Postgrad, which I thought was pretty bad, so I had no anticipation for this movie. She wrote and directed it, and I gotta say, this is one of the biggest surprises of this entire year. I love this movie. For this genre, what this movie is, an angsty high school movie where you have a character who's trying to traverse the horrible hell that is high school while dealing with everything else that comes with life. There's a whole bunch of movies like that. You got Heathers, you have Mean Girls. This is definitely in the upper echelon of those films because of how well written it is. I loved how this movie was rated R. These high schoolers talk vulgar. They say shit that high schoolers say. There's no attempt to censor or water down this movie or make it PG-13 to get a higher box office return. Because if you actually watch the trailer for this movie, it looks like a PG-13 type movie, the Green Band one anyway. But this is a surprisingly mature film that I think is actually more aimed at adults who have gone through these life experiences, can look at those life experiences and go, oh, I remember that, and that's very true. And that's something I also really appreciated about this movie because the scenes and the scenarios that play out for young Nadine get increasingly more humiliating and awful for her, but they always feel like they're coming from a place of truth. The dialogue really bites. I mean, she will often just explode on people and say the most offensive things you could think of to say to somebody, and then they will just come back and say it right to her. There's no attempt to make this movie politically correct. In fact, there are even words and phrases used in this movie that most people would be like, oh, you can't say that. And no one in the movie goes, oh, don't say that word. You can't say that word, that's bad. High schoolers talk the way high schoolers talk in this movie, and I really appreciated that about this film. There's no attempt to be like, hey, look, here's the squeaky clean version of today's high school. It's not like that, and that's something I loved. Hailee Steinfeld was great in True Grit. I thought she was really good for such a young actress, and here, though, I think she gives my favorite performance I've seen from her. Her character is most certainly a drama queen. She's rude to everyone, her family, her friends. Nobody gets off that list. And the movie also doesn't take the easy way out of explaining why she is that way. It doesn't just take a horrible family tragedy and say this is why she is this way, because the film actually shows her before that occurs as a young girl, and she was difficult to deal with even then. Then the film says, hey, you thought she was bad then? Well, let's just throw all this shit on her, and oh my God, look what came out of that situation. There are logical reasons for her acting this way. It's not just like, oh, she's an angsty teen because this is an angsty teen movie. I gotta say though, I think my favorite thing about this movie, and it's specifically because I'm a guy, usually when I go to movies like this that are written and directed by a woman and the lead character is a woman, 90% of the time, most of the male characters in the film are all monsters who have no depth to them, who just exist to make life living hell for all the female characters, which is a big reason I think a lot of guys don't enjoy going to movies like this. One of the most refreshing things about The Edge of 17 for me as a guy is that the male characters are also given a lot of depth and a lot of background, and you can understand where they're coming from. They're not just little pieces on a board to be positioned in a certain way to make everything shitty for our main character. There's one dude in this movie towards the end who's kind of an asshole, but even him, you can understand why he's upset and why he's doing what he's doing because of what he was led to believe. And it's the same with the women in this movie. Nadine isn't just an angsty teen because that's an easy route to take as a writer. Her best friend who ends up sleeping with her brother, which isn't a spoiler by the way, it's in like the first 5 minutes of the movie. She's not just that girl that does that because you need a dramatic scene in a movie. She feels real too, and so does her brother. You don't look at him and go, what an asshole for doing that. It's sort of just like this really terrible situation, and it's very real. I mean, there are so many times in real life where people just make mistakes who are friends or family members, and they're not assholes for making mistakes. People just make mistakes, and sometimes shit happens. And this movie explores that really well and gives it a far more mature level of depth than I was anticipating. One of my favorite parts of this movie is Woody Harrelson as her teacher, who just says everything a teacher should never say. As somebody who used to work in the school system, I gotta say that's one of the more unrealistic parts of the movie. If people found out what he was saying, he'd be fired instantly on the spot, but it did provide a lot of really good humor in the movie, and I loved their conversations. I suppose my biggest flaw with this movie is that at about the halfway point, when you see every character that's been introduced, you can instantly know where everything's going. You can look at that character and say, okay, those two are going to be together. You can look at that person and be like, not going to happen. It's just, you know exactly where the film is going, and it follows those similar storytelling cliches and tropes that you would expect in a film like this. That's my biggest flaw with the movie. But I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If a film has great characters and good dialogue and is directed with passion, I can watch a film and understand where it's going to go, and it can have cliches, but if it's all done really well and shown through someone's vision that feels original and fresh, I'm fine with that. The Edge of 17 is one of the biggest surprises for me of this entire year, and I'm going to give it an A-. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is really good, but don't let that huge film bury this film. Go out and see this. It's worth your time. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching, and if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.